I'm Orville Wright, President of the Air Force Association, and I have the privilege today to join you in a conversation with General Wolters. And he will share his perspectives leading the joint and allied forces in the complex and evolving European theater. General Wolters' area of focus spans Europe, parts of Asia, and the Middle East, the Arctic, and the Atlantic Oceans. His command includes more than 60,000 military and civilian personnel, and he is responsible for coordinating 51 partner countries. As SACEUR, he is responsible for the planning and execution of all alliance operations. General Wolters, Todd, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Bruce. It's great to see you again, and big thanks to you and Chief Murray for all you do at AFA. All 70,000 of US EUCOM members appreciate each and every one of your efforts. We wish we were there together, but like many things over the past year, the coronavirus forced a change of plans. We're grateful for the technology that enables important events like this Aerospace Warfare Symposium in the midst of a pandemic. Our condolences to all those impacted by COVID-19. As the battle against this virus continues, we must remain vigilant to ensure this health crisis doesn't morph into a security issue. In keeping with the focus of this session, we'd like to share with you our strategic perspective from US EUCOM's area of responsibility. Everything we do is about generating peace. We compete to win. We deter. And if deterrence fails, we're prepared to respond to aggression. Primarily through NATO, we work closely with allies, partners, and the U.S. interagency to address the evolving challenges posed by our adversaries to secure peace and protect U.S. interests abroad. Securing America requires a global effort. When it comes to countering U.S. adversaries in Eurasia, our most effective and efficient strategy is to continue supporting the strong bonds we possess in NATO and throughout all of Europe. As threats to our respective nations have evolved over 7 decades of NATO's existence, the alliance has adapted to provide for the collective security of its members. NATO's ongoing evolution is captured in the concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, commonly referred to as DDA. It was released in 2020, and it's NATO's first deterrence and defense concept since 1967. Nested with the 2019 NATO military strategy, DDA guides the alliance's approach towards threats, peace, and stability. This comprehensive effort outlines deterrence in the land, air, sea, and cyber domains, and extends beyond the bounds of the Earth to outer space. The concept includes some down-to-earth approaches to winning in competition. But DDA is just one of many initiatives demonstrating NATO's continued contribution to a common defense. NATO conducts military exercises fostering cohesion among the participating nations and boosts security trusts across the European continent. As a result, NATO remains vibrant and relevant, as evidenced by North Macedonia's accession as the 30th member nation of the alliance just this last year. NATO remains the strategic center of gravity and the foundation of deterrence and assurance in Europe. US EUCOM contributes to NATO's success in a number of ways, and exercises are one of our more visible activities. Exercising with NATO and non-NATO partners demonstrates readiness, interoperability, and capability. We give these exercises bold and important names like Defender Europe and Astral Knight. Why? Because they are vitally important to demonstrating the collective capabilities of our allies and partners. These exercises ultimately contribute to deterring our adversaries from conducting activities which may threaten European security in the homeland. Our air forces in Europe play a critical role, as do all of our components in all domains, in demonstrating our collective resolve and readiness to deter our adversaries and sustain peace. Beyond exercises, we conduct operations and other activities to compete, deter, and prepare to respond to aggression, including presence in the Black Sea region. This past summer, in conjunction with the annual U.S. and Ukrainian co-hosted exercise Sea Breeze, United States Air Forces in Europe led a joint all-domain command and control mission in the Black Sea with Air Force, Navy, Special Operations Command, and Space Command assets. During the mission, F-16s executed scenarios using joint air-to-surface cruise missile tactics and facilitated the integration of Air Force ISR assets to further refine joint command concepts. Our air forces are also supporting NATO by operating MQ-9s in Romania. These airmen will support agile combat employment exercises and freedom of maneuver missions to integrate with joint and coalition forces in the Black Sea region. And right now, farther to the north, Air Force bombers are strengthening our enduring partnership with Norway. These missions demonstrate our commitment to our allies and partners and the credibility of our air forces to address a more uncertain global security environment. Across Europe, we're in the 60th year of NATO air policing missions. 60 years of allies working collectively under NATO to safeguard and protect the integrity of the skies over Europe, using air surveillance and control systems, air command and control, and quick reaction alert jets to respond to aircraft failing to comply with international flight regulations, and approaching allies, also valuable airspace. These missions ensure airspace safety, assure allies airspace, and reassure alliance nations with continuous 24/7 air policing. We remain vigilant and are ready to respond in all domains with a lethal and resilient force. Should deterrence fail, shifting our forces to competitors, we live in an increasingly complex and contested world. Political uncertainty, energy competition, and diffusion of disruptive technology are stressing the established rules-based international order. Threats and challengers seek to take advantage of these conditions through aggressive action using all instruments of national power and are backed by increasingly capable military forces. Adversaries amplify these malign activities and foment instability with disinformation and destructive cyber campaigns, testing national governments and multinational institutions. If left unchecked, these activities could escalate into more aggressive behavior. Meeting these threats and challenges require us to take meaningful steps away from a binary model of peace or war, and towards a gradient that includes one of competition with a military dimension below armed conflict. We're in an era of global power competition. Winning in this era is ensuring global power competition does not become global power war. Despite widespread international condemnation and continued economic sanctions, Russia engages in destabilizing and malign activities across the globe, with many of those activities happening close to home on the European continent. Russia seeks to maintain a sphere of influence from the Soviet era by retaining or employing forces to coerce neighboring sovereign nations. In this global power competition, Russia is employing unconventional tools like private military companies in an effort to intimidate, weaken, and divide our allies' partners. Russia remains an enduring existential threat to the United States and our European allies. Additionally, China's growing European influence centers around an aggressive economic and diplomatic campaign. 17 Central and Eastern European nations participate in a cooperative framework program led by China. Some European countries have bilateral agreements to build infrastructure and give China an advantage in global trade and market access. Other European nations have incorporated Chinese state-backed 5G networks. These networks pose security risk. Additionally, China's growing interest in investment in European ports and infrastructure complicates steady-state and contingency operations. While several European nations recognize the dangers of dealing with China, we articulate this risk to our European defense counterparts and highlight shared values, interest, and equitable business practices that distinguish the U.S. as a partner of choice. This global power competition is not only a European concern, it is truly global, and as geography previously inaccessible becomes more open, like the Arctic, we seek stability and security. Finally, terror groups remain an ever-present threat to peace and stability on the European continent. NATO and the United States continue to prevent conditions that support the growth of international terror groups and, if necessary, remain prepared to take direct action. Facilitating sustainable economic development, fostering cooperation, and ensuring a stable, conflict-free Arctic region enhances interoperability and proficiency and demonstrates a collective resolve to uphold the rules-based order. However, Russia, an Arctic nation, and China, having declared itself a near-Arctic power, continue to militarize the region and seek to establish economic footholds to gain influence over regional governance. The activities by Russia and China illustrate the importance for U.S. EUCOM, together with our allies and partners, to maintain a credible Arctic deterrence and ensure vital sea lines of communication remain open by securing the Greenland, Iceland, and United Kingdom gap. As competition extends beyond the confines of Earth, we must also focus on what is happening in space. Our military advantage depends on space, and our adversaries have taken note. Space capabilities we've developed have had enormous benefit for every American and are vital to our nation's security. Our $20 trillion economy runs on space. However, in the last 15 years, Russia and China have weaponized space, and their concerning activities do not reflect the behavior responsible of spacefaring nations. To counter these efforts, our nation's space defense strategy provides a framework to maintain space superiority, provides space support to national, joint, and combined operations, and ensures space stability. U.S. EUCOM leverages U.S. Space Command's ability to bring space capabilities to day-to-day military competition, integrating with allies and partners, developing plans, conducting exercises, operations and activities, and if necessary, to the fight. We're off to a good start with NATO's Space Center integration into Allied Air Command at Ramstein Air Base, Germany. U.S. Space Force Commander General J. Raymond also understands our allies and partners are key to protecting U.S. space assets from hostile attacks. He and his team of Guardians are training and sharing data across the alliance. Through the command and control of all Defense Department satellites, Space Force Guardians provide force multiplying effects with continuous global coverage, essential in-theater secure communications, weather and navigation data for ground, air, and fleet operations and threat warning. Space Force ground and space-based systems monitor ballistic missile launches around the world and provide early warning of an attack on the homeland. Most importantly, the Guardians are working closely with their sister services in securing space domain because we know what happens in space affects all domains. When you stop to think about all the things we've covered today, it's easy to see that the world security situation is quite complex, and Europe and the U.S. remain the foundation for upholding a free and open international order. The future will only bring more complexity and expanding challenges, which is why we must continue to remain vigilant. The good news for U.S. EUCOM is that the brave men and women assigned to this command are meeting today's challenges head-on. Notably, this includes our first ever Guardians from the Space Force. Small in numbers now, but punching well above their weight class. For our Air Force, your contributions to peace across the Euro-Atlantic area remains robust. From Lakenheath to Ramstein to Aviano and so many other locations, each of you should be proud to know that your Air Force brothers and sisters are on the front lines, competing with our adversaries every single day and generating peace for America, our allies, and our partners. We have an incredibly strong and capable Air Force, led by many watching this event today. Nowhere are your skills, leadership, and capability more evident than in U.S. EUCOM. Looking forward, our priority remains to focus on enhancing our deterrence capability and improving our competitive edge. Our current security posture is strong. We possess combat-credible capability across all domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyber. We will maintain and work to hone this capability to deter our adversaries and defensive partners and our interest. 75 years of support from organizations like the Air Force Association is key to our continued success. We appreciate your efforts to keep the United States Air Force a vital part of the nation's defense. We are stronger together.
Well, sir, thank you again for your terrific opening remarks and an overview of just how busy the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is and what you and some incredible people are doing across Europe with really a worldwide impact. To start, sir, we have seen, as you addressed, increased activity and posturing between U.S. and Russian aircraft in Northern and Eastern Europe. How are U.S. and NATO forces adjusting to this new normal? And I know you work closely with multiple air chiefs in this air power operation. So again, a bit more of your insight on air policing for some of us that are not really familiar with that long-standing operation would be great. So please, over to you.
Well, again, Orville, thanks for the opportunity to spend some more time with you, and it's good seeing everybody today. As the team knows, we've had air policing incidents fairly consistent over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. Of course, the difference is the amount of indications and warnings and command and control that we apply from a NATO and U.S. perspective to make sure that the skies are as safe as they can possibly be. And there are not only incidents in the air, but there are incidents actually at sea where we have Russian aviation in close proximity to some of our vessels over the water. So from a U.S. EUCOM perspective, we track all of that. What I'm proud to report of is our readiness, and that's what I concern myself the most with, is how fit are we, how responsive are we, how resilient are we, how lethal are we, and the fact that 100% of the time we can professionally intercept all of their aircraft, and 100% of the time when Russians commit intercepts against our U.S. and NATO aircraft, our crews display professionalism, and that has been the case. So I would tell you that the frequency is actually been fairly consistent over the course of the last several years. What has changed is the professionalism. Our NATO force and our U.S. force, I was never too concerned about, but always focused. And surprisingly, here's something that's occurred. Russia's professionalism has actually increased as a result of U.S. and NATO professionalism. They understand that it's important to be careful and vigilant in the skies and at sea. So overall, we're in pretty good shape. I will tell you that our air crews, our Air Force is as ready as it has ever been. And the United States leads from the front when it comes to the air domain, without a doubt. And professionalism is at an absolute all-time high. And that demonstrated professionalism on behalf of the U.S. and NATO kind of starts to spill over into what Russia does. And they don't like to be looked at as junior varsity participants in a varsity football game. And they realize that there's nothing to be gained by being cavalier or stupid in the air. And their degree of professionalism isn't perfect, but ours is. And as soon as they get theirs to perfect, I won't be concerned at all. But I'm really, really proud of what all of our warriors have done in the air domain over the course of the last several years to ensure that the skies are safer over Europe and our sovereignty continues to be protected.
Thanks, sir. Well, we got to be proud of every one of your air warriors across obviously multiple NATO participating nations. And thanks to you and all our air chiefs. We're very fortunate to have terrific air attaches here in town. And this is an opportunity for AFA to thank our air chiefs through our air attaches for all we're doing across Europe and really around the world. Well, sir, let me shift to the next question. A lot of publicity, if you will, around the Trump administration's plan to reduce force levels, U.S. force levels in Germany. So I know the audience would appreciate your thoughts on that, on the way ahead, again, for the continued stationing of U.S. forces in Germany.
Well, Orville, first and foremost, the new administration has decided to conduct a comprehensive strategic review of what we're doing with our assets across all of the combatant commanders' AORs. So as you would expect, and as I certainly anticipated with the new administration, is that when they got into this particular portion of what we were looking to do conceptually with respect to U.S. military participants overseas stationed in Germany, and how we were proposing to lift and shift some of those forces, this administration and Secretary Austin have obviously said, "Well, stop all activity because we have to conduct this strategic review." And I don't want to say a strategic review that just applies to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines in Germany, but it applies to all of them across all of planet Earth. And as we all know, in the area of great power competition, Russia is just as much as a factor of as China is we need to take a comprehensive review across the board to make sure that every move that we were proposing previously is still valid for the future. And for right now, those discussions are all on hold, and we're awaiting further guidance from the administration down to Secretary Austin down to us when he's ready. And then we'll go back to the drawing board and see what the orders are from this administration through Secretary Austin to us. But for right now, those particular actions as they apply to Germany from a U.S. military perspective are certainly on hold.
Thanks, sir. Really appreciate expanded remarks on what's going on. And you know, as the J3, you should know that young Brigadier General Wright and young Colonel Austin were together working for a great J3 many years ago. And we are so proud of General Austin and what he's doing, and thankful that he's our SecDef. He certainly brings incredible national security and joint warfighter experience to the whole national security decision process. So let's shift just a minute to you know, agile combat employment in Europe. We know General Reagan is committed to the concept of ACE, or agile combat employment, and that certainly is his leadership focus across Europe. ACE, or the reliance on smaller packages spreading out at more basing locations when necessary, seems to be working. There's a lot of training going on, but could you talk a little bit about how the ACE concept and ACE operations, if you will, have affected your planning and joint and allied warfighting readiness?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right, Orville. General Reagan's USAF team has done a fantastic job, and you know, agile combat employment kind of mirrors General Reagan. It just reeks with lean, mean fighting machines. So all of the force elements that represent the United States Air Force are certainly present in Europe and USAF, and those 5 critical mission areas that the Air Force is responsible for to the President of the United States: strike, superiority, surveillance, C2, and lift. General Reagan's team delivers that capability tremendously across all of our AOR, and each one of the force elements that exist inside of each one of those mission areas that are represented by all the units throughout United States Air Forces Europe are certainly agile, that they're certainly combat capable, and they're ready to deliver right now. And what I think, and what I'm pretty certain of, is General Reagan focuses on that one key area for agile combat employment, and that is the readiness this second for that force element to be able to deliver. And I will tell you, Orville, for my time when I was fortunate enough to serve as a USAF commander in the last couple of years serving as a US EUCOM commander, that there has never been one second where one of our force elements in Europe was not ready. They've always been ready. And when I say ready, it means they're agile, they're resilient, and they're very, very, very lethal at what they do, whether it's strike, surveillance, superiority, command and control, or lift. Our airmen know exactly what the mission is. They know what their responsibilities are, and they don't flinch in a millisecond. They're ready, willing, and able to serve. And that's all I've witnessed 100% of the time. And I think you would agree, for the vast majority of your career, you witnessed the same from a force element standpoint. One of the unique things that we do here in Europe is we move those force elements around a lot. Some of it is to go to a different nation to work for a couple of weeks to build trust with that nation, and also to transfer some tactics, techniques, and procedures, to listen a little bit and learn a little bit from that corresponding nation. So the concept of agile combat employment is a two-way street with partners and allies. And we've had tremendous success here in Europe because we have so many allied locations from an airfield perspective that possess the capability to ingest some of these U.S. Air Force elements and have them work for a couple of weeks and be able to integrate into the force. And as you can well imagine, for the potential enemy of us in NATO, that's very bad news. It just means that each and every one of the 30 nations that are involved in NATO are that much more interoperable with their sister nations and their sister services. And that spells collective bad news for potential foes of us. So we're really pleased with agile combat employment. We're super pleased with the readiness disposition of our forces here in USAF. Our component commander, General Reagan, is the best I've ever seen, and his airmen are just the same.
Thanks, sir. You know, I found it really interesting in your remarks as you talked about peer threats. And obviously, there's an understanding, I think, generally that Russia is a peer threat you look at every day, but you expanded that to the impact of the China threat in Europe. And so, as you work with, excuse me, Admiral Davidson, and across the Arctic, it's a shorter distance than many would think for a bomber to get from a base in Europe to Admiral Davidson's AOR. So could you talk a little bit about how EUCOM works with Indo-PACOM to together deter and, if necessary, defeat the China threat?
Absolutely, and part of my challenge here in Europe is malign influence on behalf of China on the soil of Europe, and with respect to what China is willing to do with Russia to expand that malign influence. Part of Admiral Davidson's threat in the Pacific is what takes place from a malign influence on behalf of China, and also the malign influence that Russia demonstrates and exerts in Indo-PACOM soil. So for both Admiral Davidson and I, we would be foolish and myopic if we isolated all of our activities solely on one nation as an enemy and didn't include the friends and foes of the potential enemy. So when we look at the problem set of Russia here as NATO and in Europe, 100% of the time, the conversation has to extend to the so-called friends of Russia, and that happens to be China. And then we obviously examine China's influence on our soil and ensure that we're conducting the appropriate activities to effectively deter and win in peace, so that, heaven forbid, we don't have to go into conflict. And we've recently done some things over the course of the last several years that I think that the Air Force has been very responsible for in improving our deterrence posture here in EUCOM as well as Indo-PACOM. And that happens to be the Bomber Task Force. And there were periods 4 or 5 years ago where we examined what we could do as a U.S. Air Force from a Bomber Task Force perspective that had an impact in Europe with respect to Russia. But what we obviously grew to understand was that you couldn't just fly one bomber mission led by U.S. airmen in the vicinity of Europe for the purpose of improving the deterrence posture against Russia without bringing China into the discussion. And obviously there are Bomber Task Force missions that we execute in Indo-PACOM that have the same counter impact back here in Europe. So the degree of strategic transparency and alignment that has to occur from a comprehensive U.S. versus Russia, U.S. versus China, U.S. versus Russia and China perspective, we've certainly improved upon as a U.S. Department of Defense. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, Secretary Esper got into full afterburner on that very subject. We had numerous discussions, numerous plans adjustments to make sure that what was taking place in Pacific soil was taking into account European impacts by Russia in Europe, as well as the corresponding ripple effect that would occur in the Pacific and vice versa. And as Secretary Austin has come on board, it's been immediately apparent that is his very concern as well. Hence, he's called for a comprehensive strategic military review to make sure that we're doing the appropriate dotting the I's and crossing the T's to ensure that we're getting this right. But I will say that our U.S. DoD is more strategically comprehensive with the globe writ large, with all countries and with all domains. And I certainly think that our Air Force is the same, because we're so heavily involved in Bomber Task Force activities that occur in the Pacific as well as Europe.
Thanks, sir. You know, it occurs to me that while NATO was set up immediately to counter really the threat from the then Soviet Union, NATO is even more relevant today in its ability to ensure security around the world. So let's go around the world, but let's go higher and faster. And I know you work closely with General Dickinson, the U.S. SpaceCom Commander. You've got your own experience as the former A3 in Air Force Space Command. So could you talk about our Guardians a bit and how SpaceCom and U.S. Space Force has become such a growing and important part of what NATO, in NATO's mission?
It is. We've established our first component. It will, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, it will support us at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and USAF will be the lead component, and NATO AirCom, which is also commanded by General Harigian, will be the lead NATO component. And for all of us, it's long overdue. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out space is far and away the largest domain that exists in the universe, and there just isn't any way today that you can approach any problem, whether it's tactical, operational, or strategic. And if you're attempting to approach that problem from a comprehensive standpoint in all domains, and you want to start from big to little or little to big, at some point, you're going to bring space into the cross-check. I would say that in the 21st century, because of reliance on speed with respect to communications and the transference of information, if you want to be a lead nation, you certainly are supported by a satellite constellation in order to achieve that speed. And because you have a satellite constellation, you're using some turf up in space, which means good order and discipline is something that all nations on planet Earth should adhere to. And we're now to the point to where we have a separate service that represents the United States Department of Defense, led by our Guardians. We have a separate combatant command, and I'm probably one of the more excited combatant commanders about these great changes that have occurred in our United States Department of Defense. There is a ton that we could talk about, but I'll just stick with the basics. In any military campaign, Orville, as you know better than I, you need to make sure that you have comprehensive indications and warnings, that you have rock solid command and control and feedback, and obviously at the far end you have rock solid mission command, which is soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines doing everything that they can do to be able to accomplish the mission, isolated from their command chain. That is what we have in our U.S. Department of Defense. And I would contend we have the greatest military in the history of humanity, but we still have to get better. And if you want to really be comprehensive, there is just no way that you're going to improve indications and warnings, command and control, and mission command unless you improve your capability to operate by, with, and through space. And we in the United States certainly recognize that. We're seeing that Russia recognizes it. We're seeing that China recognizes it. We're seeing that other nations recognize it. We are seeing some nefarious activities taking place in space. We don't want that to occur. So the fact that we now have the Guardians on board as a separate service to lead that charge is great for the United States of America. And the fact that we have a designated combatant command, U.S. Space Command, is also great news for America. We got a long ways to go to feel comfortable about where we are, but having the Guardians that I've had the great opportunity to serve with, I feel like we're in good shape, and I know we're going to be in better shape tomorrow. And I know that 2 months from now, we're going to be even in better shape, and we're on course, on glide slope to continue to improve our ability to make sure that we can provide good order and discipline in space like all other domains.
Well, I could go on. Terrific. It occurs to me listening to you that you're the perfect guy to ask about Joint All-Domain Command and Control. As you know, you have multiple industry partners out there listening to you. You began, I think, in talking about space in its importance to having effective Joint All-Domain Command and Control. So could you take us a little further into what Joint All-Domain Command and Control means to you? But more importantly, I think we get wrapped up on command and control for command and control versus command and control to achieve battle space effects and to deter and defeat enemies decisively. And so what a great opportunity, I think, for all of us in the Air Force Association, across industry, to help advocate for the why of Joint All-Domain Command and Control.
Well, the why goes to the brass tacks, or we want to win in competition as the United States. We believe in our values. We want to promote those values. We believe in peace. We want peace to continue in perpetuity. We currently exist in a state called competition with the vast majority of the nations that are potential enemies of us on planet Earth. And we need to demonstrate that we can win in competition, which is pretty close to what we're doing today with some minor warts that appear. And we do so because we can effectively deliver results in the battle space or in the environment to ensure that peace remains in perpetuity. And what you do in all domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and whole of government, whole of nation, and in all geographies is critical. What you do going from big to little has to be synchronized, and that's starting from space all the way to the private who's in a ditch in the vicinity of Estonia. There has to be connective tissue behind the why, and the why has to be that private needs to understand just as readily as that lieutenant colonel does working a satellite as to what their objective is. And that's obviously to better deter today than you did yesterday and to get better tomorrow. And joint all domain command and control is geared to ensure that we can comprehensively deter and comprehensively defend in all domains. And it mandates that we get feedback from a TOC that's on the ground, or from a CIS that's at sea, or from an AOC that happens to be in Qatar, or from one of Jay's space centers. We have to make sure that in all those domains we can transfer information and understand why we're transferring this information and what the information says, and what results we're attempting to achieve in the so-called environment/battle space. But the key is this: can we deliver our deterrent effect in the environment faster than a potential foe of us? And if we can do that and continue to achieve stability and peace in today's environment, we win. And if we can do that with overwhelming force and do it with overwhelming comprehension in all domains, we win even more. And that's exactly what this concept is all about. And at the end of the day, all that matters is, can our kids and our grandkids grow up in peace? And that's what we're attempting to achieve in the environment, and certainly in the battle space. And when we embrace this concept of joint all domain operations and joint all domain command and control, it centers around us being able to deliver the appropriate deterrent effects in the environment so we can generate more peace.
Thanks, sir. Terrific insight. Embedded in joint all-domain command and control requirements, are you seeing advances in multi-level security and the ability to share information across multiple allies? I know you have many industry counterparts out there who would like to help you with that. So would you like to talk just a little bit about multi-level security and its importance to effective joint all-domain command and control?
You bet. And as you well know, Orville, from your time, because we only knew what we knew, is we started to bring hardware and software on to improve our ability either in strike or superiority or surveillance or command and control and lift, any one of the 5 missions of the United States Air Force. We were always attempting to do so with the most lethal capability possible for that widget, for that piece of hardware and software. And then we started to look at the kill chain, if you will, of vulnerabilities that existed to get that hardware or software forward to be effective. And all of a sudden we realized, holy smokes, if we don't take into account the network/cyber aspect of fielding this hardware or software and ensure that it's not vulnerable from cradle to grave, we're putting a system in play that can potentially be a target against us, and a likely vulnerability for us, and something that would enhance what the enemy can do. And I contend that in those areas, all across DoD, we've improved our comprehensive hygiene of our hardware and software from a C2 perspective and a warfighting perspective in general, far greater than any foes of us have. We had a slow start. We got after it during your time at Air Combat Command. You started this. It's continued to get into afterburner with General Holmes, and now General Kelly is working it very, very hard. And I'm proud to report that I have yet to work with anyone attempting to talk to me about the utilization of resources in Europe without comprehensively discussing cradle to grave vulnerabilities that could exist, for example, in the cyber domain from a hygiene perspective, to make sure that this is a foolproof capability that we can use against the enemy. I think we've improved dramatically, but I know one thing. I know there are known unknowns out there. And that comprehensive step forward that we took several years ago has to continue to grow, and we have to continue to comprehensively look at all of our hardware and all of our software and all of our practices and processes to make sure that the vulnerabilities are weaned out of each and every one of them. And we've certainly done that from a cyber hygiene perspective. There are things that we're looking at in space that we're doing the same. And it just happens to be one of those DoD practices that pay big dividends with respect to our ability to protect ourselves and certainly our ability to more effectively deter.
Thanks, sir. Could you talk just a bit, while you focus every day on the reality of complex joint warfighting preparation and deterrence, and obviously constantly training to fight and win. I think many in the audience would appreciate an update on your more challenging, the more challenging parts of your AOR, if you will. Ukraine, for sure, and the Baltics. I think both those areas are so complex in their security challenges that sort of a bit of a high-level tutorial from the combatant commander looking closely at those AORs, at those parts of his AOR every day would be helpful. So start with Ukraine and then the Baltics. I think would be very helpful for us, interesting for our audience for sure.
You bet. Orville, Ukraine, not a NATO ally, aspiring to be, still lots of work in front of us. Improving the number of engagements that we in the U.S. and we in NATO have in Ukraine in all domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyber, is something that we've improved upon over the course of the last several years. And really looking at Ukraine through the lens of doing all that we can do to facilitate the improvement of their military readiness in all domains is the strategic bumper sticker that we use with Ukraine. And it has been effective. They've improved in the air, as you're familiar with. They've certainly improved on the ground. They've obviously taken into account some changes in what they do from a maritime perspective. So we still have a long ways to go, but Ukraine is unique in its aspiration to ultimately want to join us, if you will, in NATO, and they're working very, very hard in that direction. The Baltics, complex, yes, but improving from a readiness perspective in all domains. And as we talk about air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and we talk about what we do as a U.S. to be more lethal and more effective, those conversations carry into every one of the conversations that we have with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And together we work very hard for those four nations to improve their strategic alignment and transparency in all domains to be able to better deter. And they're doing that with the battalion-sized battle groups that have talks on the ground, that are connected to the air policing ops centers, that are connected to our special operations ops centers, that are connected to our maritime ops centers at sea. Day in and day out, we do more and more exercises that involve all domains in the Baltics. The Black Sea is of great concern. The Arctic is of great concern. The Eastern Mediterranean is of great concern. The Central Mediterranean is of great concern. The Central Atlantic is of great concern. What takes place in Afghanistan from a NATO perspective is of great concern. What takes place in Iraq from a NATO perspective is of great concern. And what I would say is, in Europe, you can't just defend yourself by sitting in your own backyard and focusing on what's in your backyard. You have to be willing to go outside of your area of responsibility and take care of the bad guys on their turf, hence some of the activities that NATO has embraced in Afghanistan and Iraq.
But all in all, the biggest bumper sticker and the simplest solution to achieve success in a very complicated environment, and the more complicated it gets, the more you have to stick to the basics, is continue to focus on our readiness in all domains, and do so from the standpoint of always improving your resiliency, your responsiveness, and your lethality. And if you'll do that in all domains, you obviously will improve your alignment across domains, and you'll just be in a position to where you have far fewer vulnerabilities when it comes to potential enemies against us in a situation that may escalate above competition.
Thanks, sir. Just to close out today, you've been, and I'm reminded today, just an outstanding and motivational leader. Today on the net, fortunately for both you and me, as we get wiser and ever older, we have incredible younger, fortunately, airmen and guardians out there listening. And they have generational cohort counterparts across industry. Could you offer just a few thoughts under the heading of resilience and lethality, resilience, responsiveness, and lethality to our younger leaders, airmen, guardians, and their industry counterparts, to maybe encourage a bit?
Yeah,
Thanks, sir.
Well, first of all, I'll say, Orville, when I grew up, I first met you as a young captain when you were the squadron commander at Torrejon. And I walked into your fighter squadron, and there was no doubt in my military mind you ran the fightest fighter squadron in the history of the Air Force. And it was just a degree better than its predecessors. And it was because of your demonstrated resiliency, responsiveness, integrity, and lethality. And you walked the talk. You led from the front. You were a frontline instructor pilot as a squadron commander. Every young fighter pilot in your squadron wanted to look like you. They acted like you. They talked like you. And it was a transitioning Air Force, and that was in the mid '80s. And I think one of the great things that we did is we boarded our squadron commander, and we elevated our degree of Air Force professionalism. And all I've seen during my short time in the Air Force is I pity the enemy of us, because this generation that is coming into the Air Force today and the lieutenant colonels that run our squadrons today are I hate to say this, Orville, but you and I were kind of right here, and they're up here. Their degree of knowledge, their willingness to lead from the front in all areas, their integrity is simply the best I've ever seen. And it has to be because these young airmen that come out of Lackland, they're just quicker, smarter, and faster than any generation that we've ever seen. And I contend that is probably the case for the other services. I know it's the case for the United States Air Force. And I just see a fitter Air Force, a faster Air Force, a crisper Air Force than I've ever seen before. And yeah, we may not have as many airplanes as any of us would ever prefer, and the Navy doesn't have enough ships, and the Army doesn't have enough soldiers. But I tell you what, the ones that we do have are the finest patriots in the history of our nation, and they're awfully dadgum smart. And I just firmly believe that the trajectory that we're on is the trajectory that we should continue on. And at the end of the day, when you take a look at all the initiatives that occur from the administration all the way down to the Department of Defense, all the way through the services, at the end of the day, these initiatives all make us more professional. We treat each other with greater dignity and respect than we did yesterday. We're always trying to find ways to improve in every department. And at the end of the day, we have the best squadron commanders far and away in the history of our Air Force. And they make us very, very proud because they're ready and they lead from the front, and they don't flinch one iota when it comes to leading from the front. And as long as we can continue on that trajectory, I think we're in very, very good shape. And if I could sign up again and do it over again, I probably would. I don't think I'd be smart enough to qualify for any of the courses in the United States Air Force. So I'll just stick where I'm at right now. But Orville, thank you very much for the time, and thank you for your leadership, and thank Chief Murray for his. It's really a privilege to have the opportunity to spend some time with you again. Thank you.
Well, thanks, General. And as we close out, it has been absolutely an honor to have you with us across our Air Force Association and our Aerospace Warfare Symposium. For all of us participating today, if you are enjoying our symposium and the work that AFA does for airmen, guardians, and families, and aerospace experts, our industry counterparts, we encourage you to join your Air Force Association. In fact, AFA is offering discounted membership during our symposium. So click the About AFA tab on the left menu bar that you're watching through today to learn more. Again, thanks to all. May God bless America, and thank you, General Wolters, for your leadership and just spending some, I know, time in a very busy schedule with us today. Again, you fire us up. Thanks again.